The cluster had belonged to dragons for 12,000 years. Every planet, every moon, every space station flew the banner of the Draconian hegemony. And at the heart of this great empire sat the Undying, the dragon monarch. Was old, very, very old. His scales were the color of burning copper and his eyes held the light of dying stars. When he spread his wings, he could block out the sun of a small world. When he breathed fire, ships melted like ice in summer. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched entire species come into being and fade away to nothing. He had grown tired of it all. The humans were new to this part of space. They had arrived maybe 200 years ago, spreading out from their home world called Earth. The Dragon Council did not think much of them. Humans were soft. They died if they got too cold or too hot. They needed air to breathe and water to drink. They broke easily, and they lived such short lives that a dragon could blink and miss an entire human generation. Had never paid attention to humans. They were like insects to him, small, weak, unimportant. On this particular day, his flagship moved through space on a routine patrol. The ship was called the Eternal Furnace, and it was the size of a small city. Rested in his throne room, half asleep, listening to reports that bored him. Then his sensors detected something. The ship was passing through a debris field. Broken metal floated everywhere. Pieces of buildings drifted past. Emergency beacons blinked their final warnings before going dark. This had been a human colony world called New. 30,000 humans had lived here just 3 days ago. Now there was nothing but wreckage. Pirates had attacked while the hegemony looked the other way. There were slavers. They took what they wanted and destroyed what they did not need. The humans of New had been taken or killed. Their homes had been burned. Their ships had been torn apart. Felt nothing as he looked at the destruction. This was the way of the universe. The strong took from the weak. Humans should have been stronger if they wanted to survive. He was about to order his ship to move on when he heard something. It was very faint, so faint that no normal being could have heard it, but dragons had hearing that could pick up a whisper from across a planet. Ears twitched. He focused his senses. A heartbeat, small and fast, the heartbeat of something tiny and afraid. And then he heard the cry, a wail, high and thin and full of terror, the sound of a child screaming into the darkness, hoping someone would hear. Sat up on his throne, his officers looked at him with confusion. "My lord," one of them asked, "is something wrong?" The dragon monarch did not answer. He was already tracking the sound to its source. There, a small escape pod, cracked and damaged, spinning slowly through the debris. Its life support was failing. The power was almost gone. Inside that tiny metal shell, something was still alive. He could have sent a drone to investigate. He could have ordered one of his smaller servants to handle it. That would have been the proper thing to do. A being of his power and status did not personally handle such small matters, but did not call for a drone. Instead, he did something he had not done in centuries. He separated a piece of his consciousness and sent it into a smaller body. Dragons could do this. They could create avatars of themselves, smaller forms that could go where their true bodies could not. His avatar was still large by human standards, 10 feet tall, with wings folded against his back and claws that could cut through steel. But it was small enough to fit inside a rescue shuttle. He flew to the escape pod himself. The pod was barely holding together. The hull had cracked in 3 places. Frost covered the inside of the windows. The air was thin and getting thinner. Tor opened the door with one claw and looked inside. She was so small. A human child sat curled in the corner of the pod. She could not have been more than 4 years old. Her hair was brown and tangled with dust and debris. Her face was red and wet with tears. She wore sleeping clothes covered in pictures of small animals, and she clutched a stuffed toy against her chest, some kind of furry earth creature with long ears. The child looked up at him. Her eyes went wide. She had never seen a dragon before. To her, he must have looked like a monster from her worst nightmares. Scales and fangs and claws and fire. Waited for her to scream. He waited for her to faint from terror. Instead, the tiny human girl hiccuped and wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Are you a bad one?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "The bad ones took my mommy and daddy. Are you a bad one too?" Had killed millions. He had burned worlds. He had crushed rebellions without mercy and executed enemies without hesitation. He was the most feared being in 100 star systems. But looking at this small, fragile, impossibly brave little creature, he found himself saying words he had never planned to say. "No, little one, I am not a bad one." He reached into the pod with claws that had torn apart warships. Very carefully, more carefully than he had ever done anything in his long life, he lifted the child from her broken shelter. She weighed almost nothing. She was so light, so delicate. He could feel her tiny heart beating fast against his palm. "What is your name?" he asked. She whispered, "My name is. Are you going to help me find my mommy and daddy?" Looked out at the debris field. He knew what they did with their prisoners. The chances of this child's parents being alive were very small. The chances of finding them were even smaller. But he could not tell her that. Not now. Not while she looked at him with those wet, trusting eyes. "I will try," he said. It was not quite a lie. It was not quite the truth either. Nodded seriously. Then she leaned against his chest, still holding her stuffed animal, and closed her eyes. "Okay," she said, "I believe you." Within minutes she was asleep, exhausted from fear and crying and the effort of staying alive. She slept against the chest of a monster, trusting him completely. And the dragon monarch, the undying, the destroyer of worlds, stood very still and wondered what he was supposed to do now. He carried her back to his ship. He had no idea that this tiny human child, this fragile little creature who weighed almost nothing, was about to change everything he thought he knew about strength and weakness and love. But that is exactly what she would do. The Dragon Council was not happy. They gathered in the great hall of the eternal furnace, a dozen ancient dragons whose scales had grown dull with age and whose eyes burned with centuries of wisdom. They had served for thousands of years. They had seen him make many decisions, but they had never seen him do anything like this. "A human child," Lord said. His voice was like grinding stone. "You brought a human child onto the royal flagship." Sat on his throne with sleeping in a small bed that his servants had quickly made. She had not let go of her stuffed animal. Even in sleep, she held it tight against her chest. "I did," the dragon monarch said simply. "Why?" Lady Seraphine demanded. She was the oldest of the council, nearly as old as himself. "What purpose does this serve? The creature is weak. It is small. It will be dead in what feels like a moment to us. Humans live such short lives. Why waste your attention on something so temporary?" Did not have a good answer. He had been asking himself the same question. Why had he gone himself to rescue her? Why had he not simply handed her over to a refugee center? Why was she here, in his throne room, sleeping peacefully while some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy argued about her fate? "She was alone," he said finally. "She was afraid. She asked if I was a bad one." The council exchanged looks of confusion. "And this matters because," Lord asked. "I do not know," admitted. "But I told her I was not. I will not make myself a liar." The council argued for hours. They said it was beneath him. They said it was foolish. They said it would make him look weak. They said the other great powers would mock the hegemony for letting a human child into the royal palace. Listened to all of it. Then he dismissed them with a wave of his tail. "She stays," he said. "This is my decision. It is temporary. When we find suitable human authorities, I will hand her over to them. Until then, she stays." But suitable human authorities were hard to find. The sector was in chaos after the attack. Refugee camps were overflowing. Human governments were scrambling to help their own people. There was no one who could give the care she needed, no one who could help her recover from what she had seen. Days passed, then weeks. Kept telling himself that he would find someone to take her soon. He kept telling himself that this was temporary. But temporary became something else. Woke up on the second day and asked for food. Dragon food was not suitable for humans. It would have killed her. So ordered his servants to find human food. They brought her something called cereal with milk, and she ate it while sitting on a cushion that was bigger than she was. "This is a big room," she said, looking around the throne room. "Do you live here all by yourself?" "I do," said. "That's sad," said. "Don't you get lonely?" No one had asked if he was lonely in over 1,000 years. He did not know how to answer. "I am very busy," he said finally. "I have an empire to rule." Nodded like she understood. Then she held up her stuffed animal. "This is Mister, he's a rabbit. He gets lonely sometimes too. Maybe you can be friends." The dragon monarch, destroyer of worlds, looked at the small stuffed rabbit with its button eyes and floppy ears. 1,000 years of dignity told him to refuse, but was looking at him with such hope. "Hello, mister," he said. "It is nice to meet you." Smiled. It was the first time she had smiled since he found her. That smile did something strange to his ancient heart. He began to learn about humans. He had never bothered before. They had seemed too small and too brief to matter, but now he read everything he could find. He learned that human children needed sleep and food and warmth. He learned that they needed to play and laugh and feel safe. He learned that they needed love. The last part was the hardest. Dragons were not good at love. They respected power and strength. They admired cunning and wisdom, but love was something soft, something the council would call weakness. Hired human caretakers for doctors and teachers and nurses who could give her what he could not, but had her own ideas about this. "Where are you going?" she asked one evening when he tried to leave her with her caretakers. "I have work to do," he said, "important matters of the empire." "But I want you to read me a story," she said. "Nanny Bate reads stories, but she doesn't do the voices right. You have a good voice." "I am the dragon monarch," said. "I do not read children's stories." Please looked at him with big eyes. "Just one story." He read her 3 stories that night. He did all the voices. When laughed at his silly voice for the princess character, he felt something warm in his chest that he had not felt in centuries. Weeks became months. Stopped pretending that this was temporary. He modified his voice so it would not hurt human ears. He changed the temperature in his palace so it would be comfortable. He learned what foods she liked and what games she enjoyed. He learned that she was afraid of the dark, so he had tiny lights installed in her room that looked like stars. The council watched all of this with horror. Their mighty monarch brought low by a small human child. They whispered that he had gone soft. They said he had lost his edge. But they were wrong about one thing. Had not become weak. He had discovered something he had lost long ago, something that all his power and conquest could never give him. He had found a reason to care. One night had a nightmare. She screamed and cried, dreaming of the bad ones who took her parents. Went to her room and found her shaking in her bed. "They were coming for me," she sobbed. "The bad ones were coming." "They will never touch you," said. "I will not allow it." "Promise?" she asked. "I promise," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his ancient being. "Anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me, and no one goes through me." Crawled out of her bed and climbed into his lap. She was so small against his massive form. She pressed her face against his warm scales and held onto his claw. "I'm glad you found me," she said quietly. "I was so scared, but then you came and you weren't a bad one. You're a good one, the best one." Did not know what to say, so he said nothing. He just held her carefully, gently, and let her fall asleep in his arms. The council was right about one thing. This tiny human girl had changed him. but they were wrong to call it weakness. It was the beginning of something much stronger than anything he had known before. 7 years passed like a river flowing. Grew the way human children do. Fast. Too fast for a dragon's heart. One day she was 4 years old and crying in a broken escape pod. The next day, it seemed, she was 11 and running through the palace halls with laughter echoing off the ancient walls. She was not afraid of anything. This was what amazed the most. Had seen terrible things. She had lost her parents. She had nearly died alone in the cold darkness of space. But instead of breaking her, these things had made her fierce. She faced each new day like a warrior going into battle. She made friends with dragons and humans alike. She asked questions about everything. She learned faster than anyone expected. And she never, not once, treated like a monster. Dad, she called him now. She had started doing this when she was 6, had not asked her to. She just decided one day that he was her father, and that was that. No council vote, no official ceremony. Just a small human girl looking up at an ancient dragon and saying the word like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The council had nearly fainted when they heard it, but found that he did not mind. In fact, when she called him that, the warm feeling in his chest grew stronger. He had never been a father before. He had never wanted to be. But now, he understood why beings had children. It was not about continuing a bloodline or building a legacy. It was about this love, this purpose, this reason to keep going when the universe felt empty and cold. Not everyone was happy about the human princess, as some had begun to call her. There were factions in the hegemony who hated what had become. They said he had grown weak. They said he cared more about a human child than about his empire. They whispered in dark corners and made plans in secret rooms. On the night of his 11th birthday, those plans came to life. The assassins were called. They were the most dangerous killers in the galaxy. They could walk through walls. They could become invisible. They could kill without making a sound. 12 of them came to the palace that night, sent by a faction that wanted to remind the dragon monarch what happened when emperors became soft. Was in a council meeting when it happened. He was on the other side of the palace. His guards were with him. Was supposed to be safe in her room with her human caretakers. They killed the caretakers first, quick and silent, then they moved towards door. But they did not find a scared little girl waiting for them. They found something else entirely. Had spent 7 years living with dragons. She had learned things, not just reading and writing and math. She had learned how dragons thought, how they planned, how they protected themselves. She had watched the engineers build defense systems. She had asked questions about every trap and alarm in the palace. She had paid attention when others thought she was just playing. And she had prepared. The first assassin walked through her wall and stepped directly into an electrical trap. The shock was not enough to kill, but it was enough to make him solid again, enough to make him visible, enough to make him scream. Was already moving. She had grabbed a plasma cutter from her workshop. It was a tool meant for cutting metal, but it worked just as well on flesh if you knew how to use it. She did not freeze. She did not cry. She fought. "You picked the wrong room," she shouted as she cut the second assassin across the face. They were shocked. This was not possible. This was a human child. She should be cowering. She should be begging for her life. Instead, she was fighting like a demon, using the furniture as cover, using the traps she had set, using every trick she had learned from watching her dragon family. She held them off for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of a human girl fighting 12 of the deadliest killers in the galaxy. 11 minutes of refusing to give up. 11 minutes of screaming defiance at beings who had never been by anyone so small. Then arrived. He had felt something wrong. Something in his connection to the palace had told him that was in danger. He had flown faster than he had ever flown before, his wings tearing through corridors, his fire building in his throat. When he burst through the door, he found standing on her bed, plasma cutter in one hand, Mr. clutched in the other, surrounded by wounded assassins who looked absolutely terrified of this tiny human girl. "Dad," she yelled, "there are bad ones, I got some of them, but there are more." Did not speak, he simply acted. The fire that came from his throat was hotter than the surface of a star. The assassins tried to phase through the walls, tried to become shadow again, but dragon fire burned everything. Even shadow, even darkness, even beings who thought they could not be killed. It was over in seconds. When the flames died, nothing remained of the assassins except Ash. Stood in the middle of the burned room, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with rage and fear. Then jumped off her bed and ran to him. "Are you okay?" she asked, looking up at him with worry in her eyes. "Did they hurt you? Let me check." She began examining his claws, his scales, looking for injuries. The dragon monarch, who had just killed 12 elite assassins in a matter of seconds, stood still and let a human child check him for scratches. "I am fine," he said. His voice was shaking. "You could have been killed, you should have run, you should have hidden." "I did hide," she said. "Behind my traps. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Use your environment, make the enemy come to you. That's what General said in his lectures." "You listened to military lectures." "They were interesting," she shrugged. "Also, I wasn't going to let the bad ones get me. I promised myself after New, I'm never going to be helpless again." Looked at his daughter, his human daughter, this small, fragile creature who should have been weak, who should have been an easy target, who had instead turned herself into a fighter through sheer force of will. "You are remarkable," he said. "I'm your daughter," she said simply. "Dads protect their kids, kids protect their dads, that's how it works." The faction that sent the assassins did not survive the week, hunted them down personally. He burned their ships, destroyed their holdings, and made an example so terrible that no one would dare threaten his family again for centuries. But the lesson he remembered most from that night was not about his own power. It was about humans, about the fire that burned inside beings who seemed so fragile on the outside. Humans were not weak, he realized. They had never been weak. They were just different. They bent instead of breaking. They adapted instead of dying. They loved so fiercely that they would fight monsters with tools meant for cutting metal. They were, in their own way, the strongest beings he had ever known. And was the strongest of them all. Time moved differently for dragons and humans. For a year felt like a breath. A decade felt like a good nap. A century was just a chapter in the long story of his existence. He had lived for so long that time had lost its meaning. Days blurred together. Seasons came and went without notice. Nothing changed fast enough to matter. But watching grow, time suddenly became terrifying. She was 16 and leading her first squadron. 20 young pilots, humans and dragons alike, who followed her into battle training with absolute trust. She had earned that trust. She was brave and smart and fair. She never asked anyone to do something she would not do herself. When she made mistakes, she admitted them. When she succeeded, she shared the credit. "You should be proud," Lord said one day. He had been one of his harshest critics years ago. Now he watched her training sessions with something like respect. She has become a true leader. Was proud, but he was also afraid. Every day grew older. Every day she moved closer to an end that he could not prevent. She was 22 when she achieved what no dragon diplomat had managed in 300 years. Two species, the and the, had been at war for generations. Dragons had tried threats. They had tried bribes. They had tried everything except the one thing offered: understanding. She sat between the two delegations for 47 days. She listened to their grievances. She acknowledged their pain. She did not tell them what to do. She helped them find their own solution. When they finally signed the peace treaty, both sides thanked her with tears in their eyes. "How did you do that?" asked her afterward. "I didn't live long enough to get stuck in my ways," said with a smile. "When you only have a few decades, You learn not to waste them on old grudges. Maybe that's what humans are good for. We remind everyone else that time is precious. At 25, she met. He was a doctor, a human doctor who worked in the palace medical wing. He was not impressive by dragon standards. He was not a warrior or a diplomat or a leader. He was just a man who healed people and spoke his mind. The first time met him, looked the dragon monarch directly in the eyes and said, "Your daughter is working too hard. She's not sleeping enough. She's not eating properly. If you want her to live a long life, you need to make her rest." No one spoke to like that. No one had the courage. But did not seem to care about courage or fear. He only cared about his patients, and had become his patient. Could have destroyed him with a thought. Instead, he found himself nodding. "Tell me what she needs," the dragon monarch said. "I will make sure she gets it." Smiled, "That's all I ask." Married when she was 30. The wedding was held in the great hall of the palace, the same room where had argued with his council about keeping a small human child. Now that room was filled with guests from 100 worlds. Humans and dragons stood together. Old enemies who had become friends because of a peace treaty. Young pilots who had served under his command. Representatives from species that had never spoken to each other before. Walked his daughter down the aisle. His steps were slow and careful, matching her human pace. When he gave her hand to, he felt something break inside him. Not in a bad way, in the way that old walls break to let in new light. "Take care of her," he said too. "I will," promised, "but she'll probably end up taking care of me. That's how she is." He was right. At 35, had twin daughters. She named them Hope and Grace. They were small and loud and full of endless energy. They ran through the palace like tiny hurricanes, breaking things and laughing and driving the servants crazy. They called grandfather Inferno. He pretended to hate the name. He secretly loved it more than anything. The years kept moving. Daughters grew up. They had children of their own. The palace that had once been cold and quiet was now filled with the sounds of human life. Bobbies crying, children playing, families gathering for meals and celebrations. The hegemony changed around them. Humans were no longer a minor species. They were partners, integrated at every level of dragon society. Human engineers worked alongside dragon builders. Human artists created works that moved ancient hearts. Human soldiers fought beside dragon warriors with the same courage. And at the center of it all was. She was 60 now, then 70, then 80. Her hair turned gray. Her face grew lined with wrinkles that told the story of a life well lived. She moved slower. She tired more easily. But her eyes still held the same fire they had held when she was 4 years old, clutching Mister in a broken escape pod. Died when was 75. He went peacefully in his sleep withholding his hand, sat with her through the long night that followed. He did not try to offer words of comfort. He just stayed. He just let her grieve. "Thank you," said when the sun came up, "for being here, for always being here." "Where else would I be?" asked. She smiled through her tears. "Ruling an empire, probably. Don't you have worlds to conquer?" "I conquered the only world that matters," he said. "You conquered me a long time ago, little one." At 87, knew she was near the end. Her body was failing. Human bodies always did eventually, but she was not afraid. She had never been afraid of much. "I need to tell you something," she said one evening. They were sitting together in her favorite garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that no dragon could have created. "Tell me," said. "I know you found out about my parents years ago. I know they killed them before you even found me. I know you never told me because you didn't want to hurt me." Went very still. He had hoped she would never discover this truth. He had protected her from it for over 80 years. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have told you." "No," shook her head. "You did the right thing. When I was little, I needed hope. You gave me that. You let me believe that maybe someday I might see them again. And by the time I was old enough to learn the truth, it didn't matter anymore. Why not? Looked at him with eyes that held a lifetime of love. Because I had already found my family, she said. I had you. I had my daughters and my great. I lost my parents, but I gained so much more. That's what humans do, Dad. We lose things, we break, but we keep going. We find new things to love. We build new families from the ashes of old ones. She reached out and placed her wrinkled hand on his ancient claw. I don't regret anything, she said. Not one moment. I got to be loved by a dragon. I got to change an empire. I got to show the universe that small doesn't mean weak. How many people can say that? Not enough, said. His voice was thick with emotion. Never enough. Then maybe that's what you do next, said. Find more small things to love. Find more humans who need a dragon to believe in them. Don't let what we built die when I'm gone. I won't, he promised. And he meant it with everything he had. Died on a Tuesday. It was a gentle death, as deaths go. She was surrounded by her family in the garden she loved. Her daughters were there, gray-haired now themselves. Held her hands. Her great played quietly nearby, too young to understand what was happening but old enough to know something important was taking place. And was there. He had been there since dawn, sitting beside her bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting each breath like it was the most precious thing in the universe. Because it was. Hey, Dad, whispered. Her voice was thin now like paper. Remember when you found me, in that little escape pod? I remember, said. You asked if I was a bad one. And you said no, she smiled. That was the first lie you ever told me. You were a bad one back then. You were cold and hard and you didn't care about anything. That's not a lie. I said I was not a bad one and I meant it. I decided in that moment to be different, for you. Smile grew wider. See, that's why I love you. You became good because a little girl asked you to. That's the most human thing I've ever heard. Her eyes began to close. Her breathing grew slower. Dad, she said. Yes, little one. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for coming. Thank you for not being a bad one. And then she was gone. Did not move for a long time. He sat beside her body as the sun crossed the sky and the shadows grew long. Her family wept around him. Servants came and went with quiet footsteps. The palace fell silent out of respect. For 7 days the dragon monarch did not speak. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He sat in his throne room, staring at nothing, lost in memories of a small girl who had changed everything. The council grew worried. Some remembered what had happened the last time lost someone he loved. Thousands of years ago, his mate had been killed. His response had been to burn an entire planet to ash. They feared what his grief might do this time. On the 8th day, called for a council meeting. Everyone came, not just dragons. Humans came too, leaders from every species in the hegemony. They filled the great hall, standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear what their monarch would say. Looked at them all, at the dragons who had served him at the humans who had become part of his family, at the mixed families, dragon and human together, that had become common throughout his empire. I have ruled for 12,000 years, he began. His voice echoed through the hall. I have conquered worlds. I have burned fleets. I have crushed rebellions and executed traitors. I have done terrible things in the name of power and strength. He paused. His eyes moved to the place where his granddaughters stood, holding their children, watching him with eyes that looked so much like hers. But I did not truly live until a human child demanded that I color with her, he continued. I did not understand courage until I watched beings who measure their lives in decades fight with more heart than immortals. I did not know love, not truly, not until I learned it from creatures that my council once called primitive and weak. The hall was completely silent. No one moved, no one breathed. Taught me something that 12,000 years of existence could not, said. She taught me that strength is not about power. It is not about how many ships you command or how many worlds you control. Strength is about what you do with the time you have. It is about who you protect. It is about who you love. He stood from his throne, his wings spread wide, filling the hall with shadow. From this day forward, no human child will cry alone in the void if the hegemony can prevent it. Every orphan, every refugee, every small creature lost in the darkness of space, they will be found, they will be protected, they will be given the chance to become something great. He looked at his council, at the dragons who had doubted him all those years ago. This is not weakness. This is the lesson of daughter of the dragon monarch, princess of the hegemony. Small things can change the universe. Fragile things can be stronger than steel. And love, given freely to those who need it most, is the only conquest that truly matters. He turned to his family, to her daughters and great, to the long line of humans who carried her blood and her spirit. Her line will always have a place here, he said. Her descendants unto the last generation. They will be princes and princesses of the hegemony. They will be my family, and through them she will never truly be gone. The humans in the hall were crying now, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of love, of gratitude, of hope. The dragons watched in amazement as their ancient monarch, the most feared being in 100 star systems, made a promise to protect the smallest and weakest beings in the galaxy. And they understood, finally, that this was not a sign of weakness. It was the greatest sign of strength they had ever witnessed. In the years that followed, the hegemony changed in ways no one could have predicted. Dragon ships patrolled human space, protecting colonies from pirates. Human teachers came to dragon worlds, showing ancient beings how to see the universe through mortal eyes. Mixed families became so common that no one thought twice about them. The boundaries between species began to blur. And throughout the galaxy, stories spread about the dragon monarch who had been changed by a human child. Stories about the small girl who was not afraid of monsters. Stories about how love could transform even the coldest heart. In refugee camps and colony ships, in crowded stations and lonely outposts, human children heard these stories. They learned that they were not alone. They learned that somewhere out there, ancient eyes were watching over them. They learned that even the smallest voice could be heard across the void. Lived for thousands more years. He saw empires rise and fall. He watched stars be born and die. He experienced things that no human could ever imagine. But in all those years, across all those centuries, he never forgot the lesson he learned in a broken escape pod. He never forgot the small girl who asked if he was a bad one. He never forgot the answer he gave her. And he never stopped working to make that answer true. Sometimes, late at night, when the palace was quiet and the stars shone bright through the windows, would sit alone and remember. He would remember laugh. He would remember the way she had demanded that he read stories with all the voices. He would remember the feeling of her small hand against his ancient scales. And somewhere in his chest, in the place where dragons keep their fire, he would feel something warm. Not the heat of destruction or conquest. The heat of love, the heat of family, the heat of a promise kept. The heat of a small human girl who had changed everything. That was her gift to him. That was her gift to the universe. And it would never, ever fade.